Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is our week of Thanksgiving and an opportunity for you to, first of all, share with us our website, the Week of Thanks, something that you are thankful for. And in just a minute, I want to spend a little bit of time doing a teaching time that we do once a year on the history of Thanksgiving and some of the lessons we can learn from Thanksgiving. This is an important principle that we can use in turning this into a teaching opportunity. Perhaps as you have gone around the round table, around your dinner table, wherever you might have met, and ask what you're thankful for, you don't necessarily get very good answers. And then when you talk about why we celebrate Thanksgiving, you're a little bit sometimes appalled at what your kids have not learned, sometimes in the public schools, sometimes in the Christian schools, about Thanksgiving. So this is just a great opportunity for us to once again maybe educate you so you can pass some of those lessons on to your children around the Thanksgiving table. But again, if you are just joining us, yesterday we talked about this, but I thought we'd come back to it as well. And that is, last week we spent some time talking about spiritual warfare and made available the Spiritual Warfare ebook, which is still available if you would like to get it. But if you notice on that list of spiritual armor that the Apostle Paul gives us in Ephesians 6, the last one has to do with prayer and the importance of prayer, the power of prayer. And so prayer is more than just asking God to do something. It, in many cases, involves praise and thanksgiving. So we thought during this week of thanks, this would be an opportunity for you to share with us and with anybody else that likes to log into that particular area on our website, what you're thankful for. And so as you go to the website, pointofview.net, you will notice that we have a banner there, and it's got a verse up there from 1 Thessalonians 5. And if you'd like to click on that banner and share some of the things you are thankful for, it has been an encouraging, really an encouragement to me as I've had a chance to read those, and I think it would be an encouragement to some of the other listeners that go to that website as well. So please take the time to do that. Just a few minutes here talking about learn from Thanksgiving, and I have that in a historical perspective. Most all of us know was set aside by the Pilgrims who founded the Plymouth colony. This was really the first permanent settlement in New England. Of course, we had Jamestown in Virginia, but in terms of the ongoing impact that this had, this particular settlement had such a great impact on the future of America. And so we can recognize that there have been other times when there were Thanksgivings. For example, there was a time where Coronado and his men gave thanks in 1541 in the Palo Duro Canyon in Texas. The French Huguenots in 1564 had a time of some kind of Thanksgiving in St. Augustine in Florida. The French Huguenots were involved in that particular event. And then, of course, I mentioned the Jamestown settlers, 1607 in Cape Henry, but most think of Thanksgiving tied to what happened up there in Plymouth Colony. Now, the advantage that we have, especially of this particular event, is that much of it was recorded by William Bradford in his book on Plymouth Plantation, 1620 to 1647. And so they were individuals who came from the Netherlands, originally from England. They were actually originally known as the Forefathers. Sometimes they were called the Founders. The term pilgrim actually is a later term. It was used in the writings by William Bradford and really taken from 1 Peter 2, verse 11. And so what you have is these were individuals who were pretty much separatist. They wanted to separate from the Church of England because they felt that the Church of England was too decadent, too theologically inaccurate. And so they had separated from England and eventually decided that they really needed to even leave England. And so they established a colony for a time in the Netherlands. They were in Leiden, the Netherlands. But they really wanted to eventually establish a colony on biblical principles, and the obvious place to go would be in the New World, where you really could begin all over again. And so they decided to actually embark on the Mayflower and to travel across the Atlantic Ocean. Now, this is dangerous, to put it mildly, and yet they were destined to go and establish a colony. They had those in England that had actually established the charter for their colony, and this was to be established in what at that time was called Northern Virginia. Today, we would identify that as New Jersey and New York, but back then, Virginia extended much further up the eastern seaboard. But there was a problem because the Pilgrims were blown off course. Now, there's some evidence, perhaps, that even the sailors intentionally took them off course. But anyway, they found themselves instead not in Virginia. They found themselves in really uncharted territory and eventually decided to establish this colony, which came to be known as the Plymouth Colony right there in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And the writing said, thus being arrived in a good harbor and brought safe to land, they fell upon their knees and blessed the God of heaven who had brought them over the vast and furious ocean and delivered them from all the perils and miseries thereof, again to set their feet on the firm and stable earth. There was a problem, though, because before they disembarked, they came to realize that they did not have a charter for this area, because this area was actually not claimed, and this was something that they wanted to establish in writing. So before leaving the Mayflower, they actually drafted what is called the Mayflower Compact. And it says that in the name of God, amen, we whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith and honor of our King and our country a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presently, solemnly, and mutually in presence of God and one another covenant and combine ourselves together in a civil body politic for better ordering and preservation and the furtherance of the ends foresaid, and by virtue hereof enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, offices from time to time, as shall be most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience, in witness whereof we have hereunder subscribed our names at Cape Cod in the 11th of November in the year reign of our sovereign Lord King James of England, France, and Ireland, 1620. And so they established what is called the Mayflower Compact. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, I want to talk about some of the lessons we can learn, but one of those springs out of the Mayflower Compact, and that is it was the first time you had something that looked like a constitution here in America. It, a matter of fact, becomes, if you will, a template for later the actual Constitution. There is certainly one opportunity to learn some lessons from this. But when we come back, we want to talk about why did they celebrate Thanksgiving? And life was very hard for them. They suffered quite a bit. And so we'll learn a little bit more about why they actually instituted this time of Thanksgiving and how that eventually became a tradition in New England, and eventually, of course, a tradition in America. Let's take a break, though. We'll continue teaching about Thanksgiving. You might want to take some notes as we go along and share that around the Thanksgiving table. Let's take a break, though. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
One of the issues in the 2016 presidential campaign was religious liberty. Many of the Americans who voted for Donald Trump believe that he would protect religious liberty by appointing conservative judges to the federal court. Ryan Anderson argues that there are executive actions that the president-elect can do even before he appoints judges to the federal court. First, he can address the threat faced by religious schools like Wheaton College and religious groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor from mandates from the Department of Health and Human Services. Houses of worship were exempted from the Obamacare contraception and abortifacient mandate. Currently, these religious groups were merely offered an accommodation. The administration could direct the new Secretary of Health and Human Services to provide robust HHS mandate. A second action could be taken with regard to the Justice Department and the Department of Education. Bureaucrats in the Obama administration reinterpreted 1970 gender identity. The next president could rescind the also instruct the new Secretaries of Education and Health and Human Services, along with the new Attorney General, to reinterpret the Title IX law in the way that it was intended. Finally, Congress can pass and the next president can sign two pieces of legislation. One is the Russell Amendment, which protects freedom in religious staffing. The other is the Civil Rights Uniformity Act, which specifies that the word sex in our civil rights laws does not mean gender identity. There are three things the next president can do to protect religious liberty, even before appointing judges to the courts. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again doing some teaching, if you can, on the issue of Thanksgiving. And we're going to look at, just in a few minutes here, some of the evidence of God's provision, as well as spiritual lessons, political lessons, even economic lessons, as we talk about that first Thanksgiving and then the subsequent Thanksgivings after that. But for just a minute, let's, if we can, put ourselves in the position of those who were in Leiden, Netherlands, and they then sail over to Plymouth Rock, and they find themselves in a very hostile environment. Life was very hard this first year for the pilgrims. Out of the 103 pilgrims, 51 of them died in that first terrible winter. You can even begin to understand the impact this had on William Bradford, who lost his own wife. And so after this first harvest was completed, and after they had lost essentially half of all of the people that were with them, he proclaimed a day of thanksgiving and prayer. Now, the summer of 1621 had provided a bountiful harvest, and we have some of the writings as well of Edward Winslow, who wrote, "God be praised, we had a good increase of corn," went on to say, "and by the goodness of God we are far from want." So they declared kind of a 3-day feast, and this took place actually in December of 1621, to thank God, and they actually celebrated with the Indians. I'm going to say more about that in just a minute. Then we go to 1623, 2 years later. They had held a day of fasting and prayer during a period of drought, which was changed to one of thanksgiving because the rain came. And it was a very gentle rain that did not destroy the crops. And so this particular celebration 2 years later, was, in a sense, instituted this idea of Thanksgiving. And very quickly, this custom prevailed in New England, and as we'll talk about a little bit later, became part of a national holiday. Now, some of you may have seen online the proclamation. Some people wonder whether or not William Bradford actually wrote it, but I thought it was at least interesting to read because it, if nothing else, encapsulates kind of what that first Thanksgiving in 1623, the one that really, in a sense, established the tradition, was all about. The proclamation says, "Inasmuch as the Great Father has given us this year an abundant harvest of Indian corn, wheat, beans, squashes, and garden vegetables, and has made the forest to abound with game, and the sea with fish and clams, and inasmuch as he has protected us from the ravages of the savages, has spared us from pestilence and disease, has granted us freedom to worship God according to the dictates of our own conscience. Now I, your majestate, do proclaim that all pilgrims and your wives and little ones do gather at the meeting house on the hill of the hours to 9 to 12 in the daytime on Thursday, November 29th, the year of our Lord, 1623, and the third year since the pilgrims landed on Pilgrim Rock, there to listen to the pastor render thanksgiving to Almighty God for all of his blessings." If nothing else, that proclamation, whether written by Bradford or someone later on, was certainly one that reminds us that they had game, no doubt turkey, they had corn and wheat and beans and squash and all sorts of fish and clams. But again, it wasn't just where you gathered around and watched football, which of course is what a lot of people will do now, but it was where they actually went to church and gave thanks to the Lord. And so this tradition of Thanksgiving began in New England. If you're taking some notes now, let me talk about a couple of lessons I think we can learn from it. And the first is the evidence of God's protection and provision. As I pointed out just a few minutes ago, the pilgrims were blown off course. There's some evidence to even suggest maybe the sailors intentionally sailed off course, but nevertheless, they find themselves on Cape Cod, which later, of course, is called Plymouth and Plymouth Rock. It says they resolved to sail southward, but encountered dangerous shoals and roaring breakers. And so they decided that they really could not sail south and began scouting expeditions and found the place which is today known as Plymouth. You can go there and actually see the recreation of it. But interesting enough, we see immediately God's protection. If they had arrived just a few years earlier, they would have been attacked and probably destroyed by one of the fiercest tribes in the region. But interestingly enough, in 1617, the Patuxet tribe had been wiped out by a plague. And so the pilgrims actually landed in one of the few places where they could survive. But there was one remaining individual who had been with the Patuxet tribe. His name is Squanto. By the way, there's a very good book about this by Eric Metaxas, who's been on the program many times before. And I'm going to summarize an entire book in actually one or two slides on my presentation here. But again, you can see that this was, again, God's provision. Because Squanto was of the Patuxet tribe, but he was kidnapped in 1605 by Captain Weymouth and taken to England, where he eventually learned English and wanted to eventually return to New England. Also spent some time in Spain, as I understand, as well. So when Squanto learned that the pilgrims were at Plymouth, he came to them. And this was such a surprise for them because here they have an Indian come out of the clearing who is able to speak English and communicate with them. And so he helped them understand how to live in this new world. He showed them, for example, how to plant corn, how to fertilize with fish. And in many cases, they credited their survival in part to the fact that he, being a Native American and knowing the land, knew how to hunt and how to plant. And William Bradford said of Squanto that he was a special instrument sent of God for their good beyond their expectation. So I think it is interesting to see that even in the circumstances with the Indians around, they found themselves actually being helped by one of those Indians who others, if they had existed at the time, might have tried to destroy them. So it is interesting to maybe look back a little bit and recognize that this happened in 1620. So on the bicentennial of the landing of the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock, so this is now 1820, this is in the 19th century, there was a desire to really dedicate Plymouth Rock and to establish what had actually taken place in the Plymouth Foundation and Plantation. And so they actually called one of the best orators of the time, who is Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster, of course, known for his dictionary, but he was also known for such great communication. And in that very special convocation that was held in 1820, here's what Daniel Webster had to say. He said, "Let us not forget the religious character of our origin. Our fathers were brought hither by their high veneration for the Christian religion. They journeyed by its light and labored in its hope. They sought to incorporate its principles with the elements of their society and diffuse its influence through all their institutions, civil, political, and literary." So there was an understanding, even 200 years after the founding of the Plymouth colony in 1620, that in 1820 they looked back and recognized how important it was for the Christian religion to be a part of those teaching. And so that, if nothing else, also brings us to some of the spiritual lessons. We've looked a little bit, of course, at God's provision. Are there any spiritual lessons we can learn from the founding of Plymouth colony by the Pilgrims? And I think one of those is simply to recognize how much the Pilgrims valued their religious freedom. I mean, they were willing to endure great, very significant physical and economic hardship in order to come to this colony and freely worship. They were, as I mentioned, among a group of separatists who decided to break with the Church of England during the 16th and 17th century. In 1606, William Brewster led this group, as I mentioned, of separatists to Leiden in the Netherlands to escape religious persecution. And then after living in Leiden for a number of years, they decided to emigrate to America because they wanted to escape the decadence of the old world. Think about this. They were concerned about the influence on their children in the 17th century, in the early part of the 17th century. We are, of course, still concerned about that today in the 21st century. William Bradford summed it up this way. He said, "Last and not least, they cherished a great hope and inward zeal, or at least of making some way toward it, for the propagation and advance of the gospel of the kingdom of Christ in the remote parts of the world, even though they should be but stepping stones to others in the performance of so great a work." They also brought with them Bibles, and of course they had the King James Bible, which was published in 1611. They actually landed in 1620, so they might have had King James Bibles in their hands, but more importantly, they also had the Geneva Bible, which was published in 1560. And prior to the Reformation, of course, very few had access to the Bible, but they were able to bring the Bibles with them. You had Luther's German Bible in 1534. You had the Geneva Bible, which I mentioned just a minute ago, in 1560. So it made it possible for them to actually have Bibles in their hands, which they used to not only teach each other, but to teach their children and to begin to apply biblical principles to their colony. Well, again, we need to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about some of the political lessons as well as economic lessons that we can learn from this first Thanksgiving. But we need to take a break. And as we go to that opportunity for you to visit the website, don't forget to take the time to click on our banner there, the Week of Thanks, and share with us what you're thankful to God about. We'll come back and talk about some of those political and economic lessons right after these messages.
I hope you received Kerby's email sent out on Sunday. We've been talking about spiritual warfare lately because of Kerby's new ebook. And the crowning weapon in Ephesians chapter 6 is prayer. As you know, prayer is more than simply asking for things. It's also giving thanks for all God has done and promised to do. One of my favorite Old Testament passages is 2 Chronicles 20, where God's people won a war by putting the choir out front to praise and give thanks to God. They showed where their trust was based by what they did. And we want you to join us in a similar effort this week. Right now, our Week of Thanks. Visit pointofview.net. There's a banner in the middle of the page, Week of Thanks. Click on that and encourage others by sharing the reasons you're thankful. I know some won't make this little effort. Make sure that you lead the charge. Pointofview.net. Click the banner for Week of Thanks, or visit our Facebook page and give God the glory He is due for what He has done. Pointofview.net, Week of Thanks. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today about Thanksgiving and looking at some of the lessons we can learn. A little bit later, we're going to focus also on the importance of prayer. Philippians 4:6 says, "Be anxious about nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God." And we would certainly encourage you to let your request and what you're thankful for be known to our listening audience. And so we have an opportunity in this week of thanks for you to visit the website, pointofview.net. Click on that banner there and share some of the things you are thankful for. And if you're just joining us, I've kind of taken us through kind of a teaching here about Thanksgiving. We've looked a little bit at the history of the Pilgrims, Plymouth Colony, looked a little bit at God's provision and protection, and even some spiritual lessons. Let me now focus on some political and economic lessons that I think we can learn as well. The first goes back to the Mayflower Compact. As I pointed out, the Pilgrims did not have a charter from their sponsors and benefactors in England for the area where they were to be located. So they decided to draft the Mayflower Compact. This, in many cases, has been seen as the first great constitutional document. It's oftentimes even referred to as the American Covenant. And recognize that this was drafted in 1620, more than 150 years before you have the U.S. Constitution. So it is a document which is unusual, to put it mildly, because it actually establishes the principles which we now take for granted today in terms of self-government. What is so interesting is to see what those British historians and political figures have said about it. Sometimes we're so close to the American experience, we don't understand it. And if you ever pick up maybe Winston Churchill, of course, was the Prime Minister of England, especially during World War II, but also quite a historian himself. He wrote a history of the English-speaking people. And he said that the Pilgrims, quote, drew up a solemn compact that is one of the most remarkable documents in history, a spontaneous covenant for political organization, unquote. So that was what Winston Churchill had to say about it. Paul Johnson is also a British historian and wrote a book that I would highly recommend to you, A History of the American People. And Paul Johnson said this about the Mayflower Compact. He said what was remarkable about this particular contract was that it was not between a servant and a master, or a people and a king, but between a group of like-minded individuals in each other with God as a witness and symbolic signatory. And so here, seen really starting with the Pilgrims, and now let me expand that to also go to the Puritans, we see all sorts of political lessons that were developed in the 17th century, long before we had our Constitution in the latter part of the 18th century. To go from the Pilgrims, we need to go to the Puritans, and they were in Massachusetts Bay Colony. Now, the first question you might have is, okay, well, what's the difference between a Pilgrim and a Puritan? Well, the Pilgrims, as I mentioned just a minute ago, felt that reforming the Church of England was hopeless, and so they were pilgrims in the land. They were separatists. They wanted to separate from the Church of England. And so because of that, you have individuals that are like individuals you may have run into today. Maybe you've been in a situation where a church or a denomination has gone very liberal, and you've decided, I just have to leave the church. I have to leave that denomination. The Puritans, on the other hand, wanted to purify the church. They wanted to reform the church and purify it from within. And that would be like individuals that you know that have decided to fight for biblical principles within their church or within their denomination. And so the Puritans established Massachusetts Bay Colony. And because of this, they also felt the need to write things down because they had come from England where there really has, at least at that time, was no written constitution. Most all of British common law was an oral tradition. So the Puritans decided to anchor their liberties on a written page, which is a tradition you can obviously see from the Bible. You find that in the Old Testament. And so by 1641, they established what were called the Body of Liberties. You can read those for yourself. Just type in the Body of Liberties, do a Google search, and you will see what is written down in 1641. As I said, more than 150 years before you have the Constitution, 98 separate protections of individual rights, such things as due process of law, equal protection, a trial by a jury of your peers, very unusual, and even prohibitions against cruel and unusual punishment. That's the Eighth Amendment in the Constitution, and you can see that these ideas were already being instituted in Puritan and Pilgrim New England, and especially the Puritans had such a powerful influence in all of New England that those ideas, which happened 150 years before we finally have our Constitution, were an establishment of some very important political principles. And so again, one of the political lessons we learned from the Pilgrims and the Puritans is how they were taking some of these principles, scriptural principles, and beginning to apply those to the body politic. Let me now talk about some of the economic lessons, because if you want to understand what happened in the Plymouth colony, you have to understand that in the first year, the colony really floundered, in part because they had a collective economic system. And that is, this was required by the partnership. The joint partnership that was established in England actually said that everyone would work to actually fill the common stores. And so as a result, then each person worked according to their ability, and then each person received from those common stores according to their need. But it completely cut off incentive. Matter of fact, if you've ever heard the phrase, from each according to their ability to each according to their needs, you find that. And even the land and the houses were joint property of the merchants and the colonists, so there was really no kind of free market. There was no kind of incentive. So William Bradford, looking at this, seeing the failure of this communal farming, decided to institute what today we would call free enterprise innovations. He began to assign plots of land to each family to work, and then the colony began to flourish. Because after all, the colonists then were challenged to better themselves, their land, and to work to their fullest capacity, and to reap the benefits of their hard work. So again, this was instituted in 1621. You don't even have Adam Smith writing The Wealth of Nations, which is really kind of the foundational doctrine and document for the free enterprise system, until 1776. By the way, 1776, pretty good year, wasn't it? Declaration of Independence, Wealth of Nations, and a number of others. So you could see that these free market ideas were already being instituted long before. You see the same kind of thing, interestingly enough, that happened in Jamestown. Thomas Dale, the new governor there in Jamestown, realized that there was no real connection between work and reward, so he decided to give each one of the men there 3 acres of land and required them to work no more than 1 month a year for the common stores. So they worked 1 month for the common stores, but the other 11 months they were able to enjoy the fruits of their own labor. This 1 month requirement was essentially a flat tax of 8.33%. Don't you wish we had a tax rate at that? And so you can begin to see that what we are talking about are some really profound political and economic lessons that we can learn. Well, let's go on just for a few minutes before we take another break and maybe talk about the history of Thanksgiving, because after all, because of the tradition in 1623 and even the one before in 1621, you had a number of Thanksgiving celebrations that began to spread through the colonies until the American Revolution. Well, during that time, then Congress issued 8 separate national Thanksgiving proclamations. Congress issued 7 separate proclamations for times of prayer and fasting, and a total of 15 official prayer proclamations during the American Revolution. And so you can begin to see how important prayer was as well. It was key to George Washington. Perhaps you have seen pictures of him praying at Valley Forge. Perhaps you've seen other pictures of him praying in the woods, praying before he was to actually become the president and those kinds of things. And it was something that was done throughout the American Revolution. As a matter of fact, only 5 months after the Declaration of Independence, this is when you had such an incredible number of losses that the colonists had faced. And as a result, they faced what they called the pinch and suffering of war and poor harvest, which were seriously imperiling morale. And so Congress set aside December 11th, 1776, as a day of fasting and repentance. And you might remember what happened after that, the battles of Princeton and Trenton, and the first victories that the colonists, the regulars, and the militia were able to achieve. Let's take a break, though. We'll talk a little bit more about the history of Thanksgiving, the importance of prayer in this country, and then we will open it up for any comments you might have. 1-800-351-1212. Doing a teaching on Thanksgiving, some of the lessons we can learn, the spiritual lessons, the political lessons, the economic lessons, even the lessons of God's protection of the nation and of those early colonists. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Kaporos literally means atonement and has been a religious tradition of Orthodox Jews for over 2,000 years. On the eve of Yom Kippur, some Orthodox Jews will recite scripture and then swing a live chicken over their head while reciting a prayer like, "This is my substitute, this is my exchange, this is my atonement. This fowl will go to death, and I will enter upon a good and long life." The chicken is then butchered in the kosher fashion, and the meat of the chicken is then often donated to those in need of food. The ceremony invites the participants to contemplate their own mortality and appreciate the atonement of their sins. The Alliance to End Chicken as Kaporos does not like this practice. They sued the Jewish community in New York City, arguing that the practice violated sanitation and public nuisance laws. The Manhattan judge presiding over the case wasn't buying it. Judge Deborah James concluded that there was insufficient evidence to demonstrate that Kaporos was a public nuisance, and she refused to judicially stop the 2,000-year religious tradition. The Alliance to End Chickens as Kaporos may not like it, but the First Amendment is a high bar protecting even peaceful minority religious rituals involving chickens. That bar should not be lowered unless there is a clear, compelling reason to do so. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Talking about Thanksgiving for just a few more minutes, and let me just mention again that this week we launched our Week of Thanks. Wanted to know what you were thankful for, so on the Point of View website, you can share with our Point of View audience what you're thankful for, and we would certainly encourage you to share that, perhaps even on our Facebook page. And just as we wind down this hour, next hour we're going to have some fun. We have two of the creators and animators of Owlegories, and they'll be in studio with us, and you'll be able to watch some of that online and also hear it on the computer and on your radio programs on stations, so let me encourage you to do that. But one of the things that we see most important with this idea of Thanksgiving were the number of times when first the colonists and later the patriots, whether it was those who were founding this country, those who were framing the government, those who were fighting, they recognized how important prayer was. And you had all sorts of different Thanksgiving proclamations during the American Revolution. You also had 7 separate times in which Congress called for times of fasting and prayer, and for a total of 15 official prayer proclamations, 8 for Thanksgiving, 7 for times of fasting and prayer during the American Revolution. And this was done in large part because they recognized that they were going up against the greatest military power of the 18th century. So again, there are some principles that we can certainly learn there as well. Well, the Day of Thanksgiving was really established at the end of the 3rd year of the war, because by that time, Congress had a number of reasons to express thanksgiving to God and to seek his encouragement and his assistance as they continued to fight this. Then you have George Washington, as he comes into the office. Now we have a Constitution, now we have the first president in 1789, in which he issued a Thanksgiving proclamation. and this was one of his first acts as president. Then you can see that he also issued another Thanksgiving proclamation in 1795, talking about God's blessing on them. And so this was where there was an attempt to try to pull together the American culture to recognize how important it was to continue to thank God. And so one of those individuals that they tapped was a man by the name of John Witherspoon. He is the individual who was the president of the College of New Jersey, which today is Princeton University. He was, though he was a pastor, and though he was an educator, was also one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And he was called upon to draft a Thanksgiving Day recollection of those various events. And in that, George Washington reminded them of God's protection and God's provision. And he actually recounted all of the ways in which he felt God had protected him and the military from the Battle of Long Island, which took place, of course, in 1776, all the way to their final victory in Yorktown, and saw that as very important. Well, then we had kind of the tradition of Thanksgiving that developed after the American Revolution and in those first few years of the American experiment. But there was a push to eventually make it a national holiday. And that's where Sarah Hale convinced Abraham Lincoln to declare a national day of Thanksgiving. And so his Thanksgiving proclamation came at a very pivotal point in Lincoln's spiritual life. The Battle of Gettysburg had occurred 3 months earlier, and many people believe that Abraham Lincoln committed his life to Christ while walking among the graves at Gettysburg. Some debate about when he was a Christian, when he was not, when he became a Christian. But interestingly enough, some even said, well, weren't you always a Christian? And in a letter that Abraham Lincoln wrote to a clergyman, this is what he said. He said, when I left Springfield, that is Springfield, Illinois, I asked the people to pray for me. Abraham Lincoln says, in this letter, I was not a Christian. When I buried my son, the severest trial of my life, I was not a Christian. But when I went to Gettysburg and saw the graves of thousands of our soldiers, I then and there consecrated myself to Christ. And so at Gettysburg, he delivered, of course, the Gettysburg Address. And it is reported that his speech was interrupted 5 times by applause and followed by a long continued applause. It didn't take long for him to give, and many people thought that it would simply fade from any kind of memory, but it was reprinted in 1863 in November in the New York Times, and so then people began to pay attention to that. And during the same period of time, Abraham Lincoln then declared this very famous Thanksgiving proclamation. I thought we would kind of wind down by this. He said, we have been the recipients of the choicest bounties of heaven. We have preserved these many years in peace and prosperity. We have grown in numbers, wealth, and power as no other nation has ever grown. But we have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand which preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us, and we have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all of these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we have become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us. It behooves us then to humble ourselves before the offended power, to confess our national sins, and to pray for clemency and forgiveness. You know, if you think about that, that is an incredible proclamation from the President of the United States. It hasn't been, it's, I guess, a better way to say it. It's been a long time since we've had a president speak like that, especially on this Thanksgiving Day. So I think it would be good to go back to that very famous Thanksgiving proclamation given in 1863 by Abraham Lincoln, and I would certainly encourage you to do so. You know, during this Thanksgiving season, we're certainly asking you to launch, as we have, the Week of Thanks, and encourage you to actually go and share something you're thankful for. But if nothing else, I think as we've looked at some of these lessons here, spiritual lessons, economic lessons, even political lessons, let's maybe return to some of the wisdom of the Pilgrims, a recognition that they valued their religious freedom and were willing to endure hardship in order to come to this country and freely worship. Today, my commentary is on what can happen in this area of religious freedom over the next couple of months. They also, of course, valued their political freedom and drafted the Mayflower Compact in a recognition of God's sovereign hand that was so important for them. And, of course, we saw that they understood how economic freedom comes by giving individuals freedom and by really making a connection between work and reward. So if nothing else, I think this Thanksgiving season, I hope you will thank God for the freedoms that we have and join with us here at Point of View to defend those freedoms against all who would want to take them away. One last time before we, in our second hour, get into some other topics, I want to encourage you to visit our website today, and as you do so, you'll find that I've posted a couple of articles. One of those is an article on Thanksgiving. It's one of my commentaries. It will come out tomorrow, but you have a chance to read it today. And then we also have a Thanksgiving quiz. And as you click there, there's an opportunity for you to download that quiz. It's a series of questions and answers, which I think would be very helpful to you as you sit around the Thanksgiving table to educate your children and grandchildren about some of the things you've heard me say this hour. So, again, feel free to download a copy of my Thanksgiving quiz and use it effectively as we educate the next generation about the importance of freedom. When we come back, we're going to talk about Owlegories, and this is going to be a lot of fun because it is a great resource for your children and grandchildren. Then we'll get back into some of the issues in the news, but we're privileged to have two individuals that have been part of those videos, and I thought it would be great as we get to the Christmas season to think about whether or not this might be a present you might want to give to your children or your grandchildren. So let's take a break. Visit the website, pointofview.net. Share with us on this week of thanks what you're thankful for. We'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
I hope you received Kerby's email sent out on Sunday. We've been talking about spiritual warfare lately because of Kerby's new ebook. And the crowning weapon in Ephesians chapter 6 is prayer. As you know, prayer is more than simply asking for things. It's also giving thanks for all God has done and promised to do. One of my favorite Old Testament passages is 2 Chronicles 20, where God's people won a war by putting the choir out front to praise and give thanks to God. They showed where their trust was based by what they did. And we want you to join us in a similar effort this week. Right now, our Week of Thanks. Visit pointofview.net. There's a banner in the middle of the page, Week of Thanks. Click on that and encourage others by sharing the reasons you're thankful. I know some won't make this little effort. Make sure that you lead the charge. Pointofview.net. Click the banner for Week of Thanks or visit our Facebook page and give God the glory He is due for what He has done. Pointofview.net, Week of Thanks.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Second hour today, we're going to have a little bit of fun, and I think you are going to really enjoy this conversation because we have two individuals in studio who are the reason that we have the Owlegories video series. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. First of all, we have Thomas Boto and his wife, Julie, and their 4 kids were the creators of Owlegories, and I know you're from Texas. Your wife, Julie's from Alaska. We have listeners in Alaska and Texas, so thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yeah, thanks for having us out.
And also, Keith, of course, he has been involved in doing animation for many years. You might remember Jimmy Neutron. A lot of people might remember that. Boy genius, as well as all sorts of other animation, and has been involved in different facets of animation, co-founded DNA Productions. Keith, thank you for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me.
Let's, if we can, Thomas, if you can, tell me a little bit about the story, because, and by the way, if you would like to watch this online, many of you can listen online on Facebook. Many of you are already listening on their radio station, but you might want to go to your computer, because you're going to see, first of all, our 2 guests, but then all the stuffed toys, which I'll hold up for various people to see as we go along here, some of these cute owls, and then all the videos that we're going to talk about. So there's a lot visually to watch. You may want to watch it online if you have access to a computer or a smartphone at the moment. But Thomas, tell the story behind the development of these video series.
Sure. It started in about 2012. My wife and I we're reading kid stories every night to our kids. We usually read God's Word, and then we'll read a story to them, and we just had so much fun doing that, and they looked forward to it every night. And we thought it'd be fun if we created our own story for our kids. And so we started brainstorming some ideas, and we thought, what if we did an interactive storybook app? Instead of just a book, what if we did an app? And so we kind of started down that journey. My wife teaches online, so at night she would do work, and so I thought, while she's doing that, I'm going to try to create this app. And we came up with some ideas, and we kept coming back to the idea of combining our love for the outdoors with our faith. And we thought that would be a fun combination. What if we used just elements of creation as an allegory? We kept coming back, metaphor, allegory, and then we thought, hey, allegories. What if we use a class of owls to help tell this story? And so it really just started there. We ended up creating this app with the help of my family. And then once we put it out in about 2013, it just began to take off.
It just took off. And again, you had all sorts of people involved: aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, grandfather, and all the rest. And we're talking about an app, but we're also talking about video on an app. So again, explain that for just a minute.
Sure. So it was an interactive storybook app. So there was elements you could touch and interact with. And so my sister was having her wedding, and so I just pulled in all the family members I could and said, here, you need to record this line, record this dialogue, or read this verse. And so we combined all of it. So it was just a simple storybook app that really was, it's simple now looking back at it, but it was the first step in this journey of Owlegories.
Well, and to make this work, Keith, you have been the key person. Keith Alcorn is with us because of animation. I know lots of people that have ideas for children's books, but they don't have a graphic designer. I have ideas I'm sure that people have for videos, but if the animation doesn't look very good, the kids aren't going to watch it, right?
Right. And one of the things that happened originally for me is a producer friend of ours, Chad Gunderson, introduced me to Tom. And when I first saw Owlegories, I saw the app that Tom and his family had been working on. My immediate thought was, why didn't I think of this? Because it's just so
it is
wonderful.
Delightful. Yes.
I loved it from the second I saw it. And so I was just going to originally help Tom kind of find an animation house and help him along the way. And once I saw it, I said, could I be involved in this too? Because I loved it. It was just awesome. And then working with Tom and Chad and the whole tiny, tiny crew that we have has just been incredible.
Yes. Well, again, I'll hold these up for people that are watching because if nothing else, you can see how cute the owls are. Of course, these are the stuffed ones, and you'll see the animations in just a minute. And we have some links there to that on the website. But again, the key is to make them interesting, delightful, and at the same time teaching a story. So you depend on Tom for the story, but you've got to still make this work as an app for kids that are going to have a level of video sophistication greater than any generation in the history of the world, right?
Right. I mean, you're absolutely right, because kids nowadays won't settle for less because they don't have to. There's so many options out there for them that if you can't make something that is going to at least compete with what they can see on a Nickelodeon or a Cartoon Network or something like that, then they're not going to be interested.
Yeah.
And so you have to do that not only artistically, but you also have to do that with the story and make sure that the characters are engaging and that the kids want to go on adventures with them.
Tom, if you can, talk about the app and what that means, because a lot of people are used to, and of course you do have the videos here where they put the video in the DVD player or whatever they might have, but it's also an app. So this is something that they can download and watch on a smartphone or a tablet or those kinds of things, true?
Absolutely. So we have 3 different apps. The first one was the Storybook app that my family created. It's still out there in the wild. And then we have the Owlegories TV app. You can watch all our episodes in a mobile device. And then we'll have a Memory Verse app, which kind of combines the two, where it's interactive, but it also encourages scripture memory. It does have some video component as well.
So again, you're talking about just a variety of different opportunities for parents to get these for their kids, or in many cases, grandparents to get them for their grandkids. So what has been the response? I'd love to hear some of the reaction that you've had so far from some of the parents and even from some of the kids in terms of watching these and whether or not they actually do apply these principles, learn scripture, and those kinds of things.
It's been absolutely incredible. It's blown us away. From the very beginning when we put out the original app, we started getting emails from all over the world, which really blew us away. So I remember South Africa, New Zealand, the Philippines, it's all over the world. We'd get emails saying, my kid loves this and there's not enough of this, create more of this, and so much encouragement. And then once we created the animated series, it just had continued to roll in. And we were down at the National Bible Bee Challenge this last weekend, and we got to interact with a lot of families and hear back from them. And the feedback was just wonderful, that kids have connected with the characters, which is in large part because of Keith and his incredible ability to do that, and through story. So anyway, it's just been wonderful feedback.
Hey, do you storybook all of these in terms of trying to figure out how they're going to move and what they're going to say and all of that kind of thing? Because that seems really complex to me.
Well, it is, and I've been very fortunate that I'm working with some of the animation supervisors and animators that I've worked with at DNA.
Yeah.
And so we have that rapport already built in. So we're able to do this with a very, very small crew. But yes, we have to record the voices, storyboard all the episodes, create animatics from those storyboards, and then, go through all the different phases of animation. I mean, it takes some time to do these, but it's such a great project and we all love working on it.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the stories. We have 4 different volumes. We'll kind of work our way through. But let me also give some of you an opportunity to join the conversation if you'd like. Perhaps your children or grandchildren have already watched the Owlegories, or perhaps you'd like to know a little bit more about what are some of the messages. We'll certainly open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. And when we come back, I thought we'd also talk about something that both of you are making available. Tom, I want to thank you for this, that listeners to Point of View can get a discount, and we'll talk about what that promo code is. So that is an opportunity for you as you're thinking about birthday presents, or obviously Christmas presents, or anything else, or just an opportunity, whether you're talking about this at Christmas time or any time, to educate your children to learn some of these biblical principles and to apply some of those to nature. And as we'll talk about in just a minute, to Christmas, we will certainly spend some time working our way through a few of the stories. But we need to take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
One of the issues in the 2016 presidential campaign was religious liberty. Many of the Americans who voted for Donald Trump believe that he would protect religious liberty by appointing conservative judges to the federal court. Ryan Anderson argues that there are executive actions that the president-elect can do even before he appoints judges to the federal court. First, he can address the threat faced by religious schools like Wheaton College and religious groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor from mandates from the Department of Health and Human Services. Houses of worship were exempted from the Obamacare contraception and abortifacient mandate. Currently, these religious groups were merely offered an accommodation that still violated their religious beliefs. The next president and his administration could direct the new Secretary of Health and Human Services to provide robust religious liberty protection to the HHS mandate. A second action could be taken with regard to the Justice Department and the Department of Education. Bureaucrats in the Obama administration reinterpreted the 1972 Title IX law to mandate that schools allow students to use bathroom and locker room facilities in accord with their gender identity. The next president could rescind the executive orders by President Obama. He could also instruct the new Secretaries of Education and Health and Human Services, along with the new Attorney General, to reinterpret the Title IX law in the way that it was intended. Finally, Congress can pass and the next president can sign two pieces of legislation. One is the Russell Amendment, which protects freedom in religious staffing. The other is the Civil Rights Uniformity Act, which specifies that the word sex in our civil rights laws does not mean gender identity. There are three things the next president can do to protect religious liberty, even before appointing judges to the courts. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Owlegories starts right here, right now. We fly around, we like to go
There's a little bit of the music you can hear in the background there, and these we're talking about Owlegories for a few more minutes, and we have in studio with us today Thomas Boto as well as Keith Alcorn. And if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to California first, listening on KYCC. Becca, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much. I just want to thank all of you for putting Owlegories together because, I was praying for a while, and Lord, help me find something that's going to help my boys and grow spiritually and learn the Word. And so one of my friends introduced me to this a website called Right Now Media, and so we can get Owlegories on there for free and watch them, and some other shows like that. And I was just really thankful. I also wanted you to know I shared it with the teacher, the private school my boys go to. I shared it with her, and she plays it for her students in the classroom. So it's just, I've been sharing it with everybody I can because I love the Owlegories series. I'm just so grateful for it.
Well, thank you so very much for sharing that. Tom and Keith, that's what you wanted to hear, right?
Absolutely. That's such a blessing.
Well, Becca, thank you for calling. And let me, if I can, for just a minute, maybe explain to people how they can get them, because in this particular case, Right Now Media used to be Bluefish TV, and so if a church has a subscription, they already have access to it. But for most of our listeners, they're going to want to go to Owlegories.com. Now, they might say, how do I spell that? Well, the good news, we already have it on the website. But Tom, explain this for just a minute, because it seems to me that you're going to, for our listeners today, if they want to use a promo code, get, 20% off? Is that correct?
That's correct. You go to shop.owlegories.com. You can also go to owlegories.com, and you'll see a link to shop. If you go there and you use Point of View, the promo code, you can get 20% off your purchase.
That's amazing. So Point of View, all one word.
All one word.
And that will give you 20% off. Now, again, they could get the app. They could get the DVDs. Talk about some of the resources that are actually available there.
Absolutely. So we have 4 DVDs available today. And then we also have some plush toys and some other merchandise. I think we have some mugs and some shirts, but all those are online. And yeah.
Well, just for a few minutes, let's talk about some of the different programs. Becca's familiar with it, but most of our listeners are going, okay, I've not heard about this before, but I'd like to know a little bit more. The first one, the sun, the seed, and the water. You use, again, this idea of nature. And I like this because I found that probably more people have become Christians at places like Christian camps and things like that. When you put God's creation with God's word together, it is amazing what that impact can have on individuals. And so the first couple of volumes are really about nature. Tell us about the first one.
Sure. So the first one is the sun, the seed, and the water. And we kept noticing in God's word where whether it is in Old Testament or New Testament, where God or Jesus is saying, I'm the bread of life or the living water. And so we wanted to take those and help explain that to kids in a fun way. And so our first episode, the sun, we talk about God being big and mighty like the sun. We talk about how he lights up the world. Like he's the light of the world, right? And so we take usually 3 principles per element of creation. And same with the seed, we have the elements to grow a seed into a plant, and so using that as a way to teach about how a believer grows in his faith through prayer and God's word and fellowship with others. And then the same with the water. We just want to explain what the living water is. And so that's what we do on those 3 episodes.
Yes. And Keith, again, you have to find a way to communicate some of that in a way that's interesting. You're talking about metaphors and allegories and things like that. So again, you do it in a way that gets into their hearts and their heads as well, right?
Yeah, we try to do that, through the characters and through the adventures they have, whether in every episode, as Tom mentioned, they have to find 3 ways that either Christians are like, fire or the duck or, the butterfly, things that are found in nature. And we try to make the adventures entertaining, the characters just fun to follow, and in some of the newer episodes, they're singing original songs, and so we're just trying to make it as much fun as we can.
Let's talk about some of the others, because you have the ant, the fruit, and the butterfly, and we just mentioned the fire, the duck, and the seasons. So these are other ways in which you can teach from nature some of the attributes of God, or some of the ways in which we as Christians can grow, right?
Absolutely. So our hope, our vision is that parents can use these as just a launching point to, again, take this and teach their kids, whether it's principles from God's word or the gospel, which is just foundational to everything we do. And so we just, although I think of all those many times, we have 4 boys, and how many times we go outside and we see a caterpillar, right? Or we see how hot it is. We're in Texas. So the sun is just this thing that's always there. And so we're just wanting to have them, every time they look up at the sun, they think of how mighty God is, or how he lights our path. And same with the caterpillar, or any of these other elements. And so we wanted to build that into everything we do.
Well, again, some of the elements of nature, and the first one, of course, the sun, the seed, and the water. The second one, the ant, the fruit, the butterfly, and then the third, the fire, the duck, and the seasons. But I thought we're getting to the Christmas season, so the latest one, the newest one, is the Christmas gift and the star. Share a little bit more about what is in that particular volume.
We are excited about this one because we had a lot of fun. We love Christmas as a family. We love our whole team. We just got the biggest kick out of doing the Christmas episodes because we could do songs in there. So we have 3 original songs. We start with the gift, and really what it is it's kind of a happy birthday Jesus party through the class for Jesus, obviously. And so the gift, and then the star is an extra long episode. So it's a 20. So it's a little bit different than the other 11-minute episodes, and they go on a nice big adventure. And the star kind of replicates the play that the preschoolers will generally do in their class. So last year, one of my sons had this performance, and it was just the most adorable thing we'd ever seen. And they had a kid come out, and he was the star, and so we thought, we need to build this into the show. And so we did that, and we had a lot of fun with it.
Well, I'd say, Keith, and again, they have to have 3 important lessons about gifts, and you have to have the cute little kid with the star, or the owl with the star.
Right.
So again, these are all the elements you need to build into that in order for that to be interesting for the kids that are watching it.
Right. And, we try to put songs in it, and we... when the kids get together and they do the nativity, it's just getting all the characters together to play all the different parts, and it's a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to record, and it's just a lot of fun to watch.
Well, again, these are 4 different volumes, and again, I want to spend just a minute, Tom, having you explain what's available, because some people might want to put this on an app. That could be on a smartphone or a tablet. Some might say, I want to get the DVD so we can plug it in and the family can watch it on the big screen. So talk about, as people go to Owlegories.com or shop.owlegories.com, either way, what they find, and again, the code words and all the things that we need to know before we let you guys go.
Absolutely. We have 4 volumes, and so that comes out to about 12 episodes. You can find them online at Owlegories.com. You can watch them digitally through iTunes or Android devices. You can also purchase DVDs through our store at shop.owlegories.com. We're also in all major Christian retailers, and we are also streaming on like PureFlix, Right Now Media, Amazon Prime, and a couple other services as well. Christian Cinema.
And we just mentioned a minute ago when we talked with Becca that if you have a church that has a subscription, say, to Right Now, which used to be Bluefish TV, then they could actually have access to that as well. So I would think that there are people right now that are saying, okay, I teach young kids, and I didn't even know this existed. And if my church has a subscription, I can start using those Sunday. Now, if they don't, then they could certainly hold it on their tablet or get a DVD and plug it in and show it and use this as ways in which you could teach in a Sunday school class. Couldn't you use it that way?
Absolutely. There's plenty of churches right now using it as a supplement to what they're currently doing.
Are there any kind of guides that they would have or other material that they might find on your website that would help them with that?
They can find more through our Facebook account. Also, we do have some crafts online that can help supplement, and then we're also working on some curriculum and some other fun storybooks along the way.
And again, so maybe we need to have you back when you have more than 4, but 4 is going to keep them busy for some time. And again, aren't these just the cutest things you've ever seen? So again, I wanted to encourage you to find out a little bit more. I've heard about Owlegories, but it's the first time I had a chance to meet you two. So let's encourage people to find out a little bit more and to leave any notes on your Facebook page, because we heard from Becca, but I'm sure there's all sorts of other people that have appreciated this and would love to have an opportunity to contact you. So again, there are the pictures of both Tom and Keith here, and on both of those we have the links to their Twitter page and their Facebook page, and then we also have the link to the website. So everything you need is right there at the website, pointofview.net. So
thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
As I mentioned, Thanksgiving, we are having our week of thanks. So if you would like to go to the banner there, it says, "Now rejoice in the Lord, you righteous, and give thanks to the remembrance of his holy name." That's Psalm 97. And we're encouraging those of you that would like to share something you were thankful for during this week. We would encourage you to go to that website and leave that particular message. And as we've talked about in the first hour, we have some great material about Thanksgiving and even a Thanksgiving quiz to teach some of these very important principles. But we need to take a break. When we come back, an open line for the last half hour. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Talk about some of the issues in the news. There's a lot. We'll talk about that right after this.
I hope you received Kerby's email sent out on Sunday. We've been talking about spiritual warfare lately because of Kerby's new ebook. And the crowning weapon in Ephesians chapter 6 is prayer. As you know, prayer is more than simply asking for things. It's also giving thanks for all God has done and promised to do. One of my favorite Old Testament passages is 2 Chronicles 20, where God's people won a war by putting the choir out front to praise and give thanks to God. They showed where their trust was based by what they did. And we want you to join us in a similar effort this week. Right now, our week of thanks. Visit pointofview.net. There's a banner in the middle of the page, Week of Thanks. Click on that and encourage others by sharing the reasons you're thankful. I know some won't make this little effort. Make sure that you lead the charge. Pointofview.net. Click the banner for Week of Thanks, or visit our Facebook page and give God the glory he is due for what he has done. Pointofview.net, Week of Thanks.
Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Thought we'd get back into the news for just a few minutes, and that is what we're going to do for the rest of the program. And if you'd like to join us, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. Good piece that appeared in USA Today, and it really answers a number of questions that we've had about the election. It's entitled, "The Presidential Election of 2016 is Over and Done, or Is It?" And the questions that are very relevant are, first of all, who won the electoral vote? As of today, Richard Wolff says, Trump has 290 votes to Hillary Clinton's 232, with Michigan outstanding. Even as recently as yesterday, you still did not have Michigan, as I understand it, still called, although there seems to be pretty good evidence that Donald Trump would win that, which would then give him 306. If indeed they still find more and more votes for Hillary Clinton, then she would get those votes, those 16 votes, and that would then still mean that she trails 290 to 248. Right now it's 290 to 232 with 16 votes outstanding. So we'll leave that. The question that oftentimes people ask is, since we still seem to be counting votes, and I want to talk about that in just a minute, is it possible that you could flip the election? And the only question you could look at is, among other states where the vote was close, only Florida could flip the election, but Hillary Clinton trails there. And in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, by too many votes to trigger an automatic recount. So there are still people that are holding out the possibility that something could change. And I alluded to the fact that you have situations in which various electors have even been threatened about whether or not they would actually cast their vote for Hillary Clinton, even though they're supposed to vote for Donald Trump. So we'll see where that is. But anyway, the electoral vote, 290 to 232. If you count Michigan in Donald Trump's favor, then would be 306 to 232. What about the popular vote? Well, this one is one we've talked about before in terms of the absentee votes that are being counted, and some still are in California, for example, which last time had about 2 million votes in the 2000 election that weren't counted, but this time they seem to be counting them. And if indeed you do have that, Hillary Clinton's lead at the moment is by about 1 million votes, which is increased in large part because of the influx of some of these absentee and provisional ballots still being counted in the state of California. She has about 63 million votes to Donald Trump's 62 million votes. And the margin in California alone is 3.5 million. So you can see how, as we've said before, if we go to a situation in which we elect the president on the popular vote, you can find 4 states, the 4 largest ones, which would be in order California, Texas, New York, and Florida, that would actually be responsible for about a third of all the votes. And you can imagine that if we move away from an electoral college, either by a constitutional amendment or by this popular vote initiative, the future presidential candidates would spend most of their time in New York, California, Florida, and Texas, and probably avoid many of you in those other states. Well, one of the other questions, where are votes still being counted? Well, most states have yet to report official results, meaning they're still counting absentee or mail ballots and more likely deciding whether to count these provisional ballots, because you recognize if you show up in a particular voting place, in a polling place, and you do not have an ID, and you're one of those states where you're supposed to show a voter ID, a photo ID, you can still cast a provisional ballot, but there are decisions being made as to whether or not we count those provisional ballots. Those are often cast by people who are not on the registration rolls or have voted in the wrong place or don't, as we said, have proper identification. Which leads to the other question we get so often, and I appreciate Richard Wolff for addressing that. Why does it take so long? Well, millions of ballots come in the last second, and as a matter of fact, in some states, they even allow for these ballots to come in after the election if they have the proper postmark.
recognize those of you in the state of Oregon right now, that all of you cast absentee ballots, if you will. They are your vote by mail. And so as long as you have it postmarked by Tuesday, you can get it counted, even if the ballot shows up 4 days later. And so that is certainly the case. And then there's another problem, and that is we have an issue of money and manpower, and even the issue of these voting machines. And so it illustrates something that we've talked about here before, because some of you say, well, why don't they count all the absentee ballots? Well, if it doesn't make any difference in the election, there are a lot of counties that say there's no point in actually counting all of those. We can simply set those aside, but we don't have to put together an official count. And so that has been kind of the tradition. And in this particular article that appeared in USA Today, they have a quote from Michael McDonald, who is a professor at the University of Florida, who said, "We vastly underfund the way in which we run our elections. The bottom line is you want to get the count right." So some of this has to do with time, some of it has to do with money, and so there are some really important questions that I think we should ask of our county election officials and our state election officials. You know, when we talk about this being a national election, it really is just 50 state elections plus the District of Columbia. We don't really have a national electoral process, and in most cases, even those state elections are run at the county level. So these are questions you need to ask in your local community. But again, one of the other questions Richard Wolff tries to answer is, how close are the two candidates in key battleground states? Well, about 3,000 votes separate Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in New Hampshire. That was a very close election, and it was also a very close election on the Senate race there. The margin is about 12,000 in Michigan, 27,000 in Wisconsin, and 68,000 in Pennsylvania, and 113,000 in Florida. Now, those are close, but nothing compared to the 537 votes which George W. Bush received over Al Gore 16 years ago in the 2000 election. But you can see how some of those, if they were a little bit closer, would actually trigger a recount, but at this point doesn't look likely. Now, the question that does come up then is, can the votes be recounted? And again, Richard Wolff says several states, including Pennsylvania and Florida, require the vote difference between the two candidates to be less than 0.5%. In Michigan, a recount is triggered automatically if the margin is less than 2,000 votes, but at the moment the margin is 12,000 votes. None of these states are close enough at the moment, and so there's no reason to believe there will be a recount, but that certainly is a possibility if they find some more ballots or something like that. Another question, is it possible that provisional and absentee voting results vary significantly from Election Day? Yes, but he says it's unlikely. Despite changes in voting laws in some states that civil rights groups claim unfairly restrict minorities, the poor, and the elderly, provisional votes that are accepted usually don't alter the results. And as I pointed out, those are some of the ones being counted right now. Interestingly enough, Hans von Spakovsky, who's been on the program with us before, a former Federal Election Commissioner and also a member of the Heritage Foundation, said the chances of changing 10,000 of votes, that's just not going to happen. And then finally, the question is, what about what's happening in California? I know I have a number of listeners in California, and it's the largest state with some of the most permissive, voting procedures. More than half of the state's votes are cast by absentee ballots, since no excuses are necessary to avoid going to a polling place on Election Day. Then provisional ballots are treated more leniently than in other states, requiring time to correct mistakes that otherwise would cause votes to be rejected. So this is why it will be very close before California finally finalizes their election. And just to give you kind of a feel for what that's going to look like, we have 8 states already that have certified their results, 4 more that will do so perhaps today, but nearly all will have to have completed their counts by December 13th, so that would be in time for the December 19th meeting of the Electoral College. And this is where you have 538 individuals meeting in their state capitals, whether it's in Sacramento, California, or Albany, New York, or Tallahassee, Florida, or Austin, Texas. And then also, of course, you have those that will also meet in the District of Columbia. And then they will vote according to the results in their states. And you, of course, have one interesting exception, and that is sometimes in Maine and New Hampshire. It didn't happen in New Hampshire, but it did happen in Maine. You have a split, and that is you have certain electoral votes go for the winner of the state, and then some ones depending on whether you won one congressional district or the other. So you'll have kind of a split in Maine in that particular situation. But if nothing else, that's kind of the report at the moment of the presidential election, and it's a reason to once again see the wisdom of the Electoral College. We'll come back and talk about some other news, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Kaporos literally means atonement and has been a religious tradition of Orthodox Jews for over 2,000 years. On the eve of Yom Kippur, some Orthodox Jews will recite scripture and then swing a live chicken over their head while reciting a prayer like, "This is my substitute, this is my exchange, this is my atonement. This fowl will go to death, and I will enter upon a good and long life." The chicken is then butchered in the kosher fashion, and the meat of the chicken is then often donated to those in need of food. The ceremony invites the participants to contemplate their own mortality and appreciate the atonement of their sins. The Alliance to End Chicken as Kaporos does not like this practice. They sued the Jewish community in New York City, arguing that the practice violated sanitation and public nuisance laws. The Manhattan judge presiding over the case wasn't buying it. Judge Deborah James concluded that there was insufficient evidence to demonstrate that Kaporos was a public nuisance, and she refused to judicially stop the 2,000-year religious tradition. The Alliance to End Chickens as Kaporos may not like it, but the First Amendment is a high bar protecting even peaceful minority religious rituals involving chickens. That bar should not be lowered unless there is a clear, compelling reason to do so. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, did want to answer some of the questions that many of you have about the presidential election. Is it over? Well, not exactly, until we actually have all of the various states confirm what indeed took place. So we are seeing right now that 8 states have certified their results, 4 more probably today. That only brings us up to 12. and we have 50 states plus the District of Columbia. All of them will need to complete their counts by December 13th. California kind of lagging behind. A lot of people wondering, can they now call Michigan since the difference is 12,000 votes? And we'll see how that plays itself out. But I wanted to bring up just a couple of other stories that we've talked about, but now we have some confirmation. And the first of these is the decision by Donald Trump, who says he plans not to pursue investigations into Hillary Clinton, either for her use of private email server or for questions surrounding the Clinton Foundation. Now, of course, that's not his call to make when you realize that the current Justice Department investigating this is under Barack Obama. But it does imply that if indeed Barack Obama either decides to indicate to Loretta Lynch, or if Loretta Lynch, the Justice Department Attorney General, decides not to pursue it, that it really is over. And the reason for that, I think in large part, even though I may disagree with it, not that I want to be vindictive, but whenever we see someone get away with something that's high profile, it just once again reemphasizes that we do not have a true rule of law. Rule of law means I don't care if you're rich or poor. I don't know if you're well connected or not. You still have to go the speed limit. I don't care whether you're rich or poor. You still have to stand before a jury of your peers if you've done something wrong or if we've accused you of doing something wrong. I don't care if you're rich or poor. I don't care if you're well connected or not. You should be treated the same by the Internal Revenue Service. And of course, we have more and more evidence to suggest that the rule of law has broken down. But nevertheless, the Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway basically confirmed this. She said, when the president tells you he doesn't wish to pursue the charges, he sends a strong message. She went on to say, I think Hillary Clinton still has to face the fact that a majority of Americans don't find her to be honest or trustworthy, but if Trump can help her heal, perhaps that's a good thing. He's thinking of many different things as he prepares to become the president of the United States, and things that sound like a campaign are not among them. So anyone wondering whether or not there would be a further investigation of Hillary Clinton, unless there's something that breaks through the Justice Department, whether the Attorney General decides to pursue something, it does believe, and I do believe that that's probably over. One of the other pieces I thought we would bring to you is the reaction that has come since the election. And I think that William McGurn today in the Wall Street Journal hit the right note, in which he said anti-Trumpers channel their inner Donald. You know, all through the campaign, we've all rolled our eyes at some of the things that Donald Trump has said, some of the tweets that he's put out on Twitter and all of the rest. And even this last week, you know, after Saturday Night Live did their little sketch, I guess he just couldn't help himself. You know, he put out a tweet deriding Saturday Night Live as nothing funny, or as the New York Times is failing. And so we hope that the president-elect does not do that in the future. But it is interesting that William McGurn talks about all the other individuals who are now sort of doing the same kind of thing as Donald Trump. And one of the examples he uses, of course, is the Broadway hit Hamilton. William McGurn puts it this way. The most recent outburst came Friday night when Mike Pence and some of his family took in a performance of the Broadway hit Hamilton. Having entered the theater to a mixture of cheers and boos, the vice president-elect at the end of the performance found himself lectured from the stage by the cast. Now, Lin-Manuel Miranda, who both wrote the musical and starred in it, tweeted that he was proud of the moment in which he characterized it as leading with love. As Mr. Pence pointed out, the cast members have a right to say what they please, but I think William McGurn also made it clear we also have the right to note how boorish and self-congratulatory this was. And do they have a right to do that at any play? Yes. Would the same people that applaud them for speaking truth to power react the same way if you had a 4th of July event and at the very end, as the president, Barack Obama, was filing out, one of the cast members began to lecture the president about how he has fundamentally transformed America in a way that would not please the founders? You can't even imagine the firestorm that would break out if indeed that was the case. But William McGurn goes on and points out it isn't just, the Hamilton play. He says, then there was the CEO. He uses just one example, and we can use many others, Grubhub's Matt Maloney, who sent out an email to employees suggesting that those who agreed with the president-elect should resign. Mr. Mahoney later backtracked, denying that his line about "you have no place here" was aimed at Trump supporters, but plainly the markets thought otherwise. His stock took a beating. He wasn't the only CEO with a temperament not suited for the job. Another CEO has been sacked for making death threats against Mr. Trump on social media. Meanwhile, you have another one who runs her own fashion label, released a statement declaring that such is her opposition to discrimination, she will never make a dress for the First Lady, Melania Trump. And then you have the, of course, long list of others. I mentioned one the other day about those who provide spices. And so this reaction is going to go on and on. But I appreciate William McGurn for reminding us that those who thought that some of the behavior by Donald Trump was boorish and self-congratulatory and inappropriate, and it probably was in terms of some of the tweets that he put out, you now have the same people that were criticizing him for doing that, doing the very same thing. And so I think this is going to last for a long, long time. My biggest concern comes with what is going to be taught to the kids. And Robert Knight, in his piece today, talks about the fact that you now have a lesson plan that has been posted by United Educators of San Francisco. It is written by a particular teacher, Fakhra Shah, who actually suggests that you should magnify lessons that are anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-Islamophobic, anti-homophobic in order for the students to gain a working knowledge of the context of American racial violence, sexism, and all of the rest. And she actually provides resources for those individuals. First of all, she says that the students might actually curse and swear, but that should be excused because of the pain they feel. And then provides resources for the 57,000 district students, including a clip from Michael Moore in Trumpland, the book White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide by Carol Anderson, then Malcolm X's 1964 speech entitled By All Means Necessary, and The Color Line by the Marxist sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois. Well, as Robert Knight says, that should promote healing and harmony. And so my biggest concern is these young minds who maybe don't have a context to put this in might be led astray by some of the things that are going to be taught in the classroom. We'll spend some more time talking about some of this tomorrow, but I did want to encourage you to take the time to find some of the resources that we have made available to you today. I spent some time in the first hour talking about Thanksgiving and the lessons we can learn from Thanksgiving. Also, there's our Thanksgiving quiz, which we wanted to make available to you. But we also have a place here for you during this week of thanks on day 3 to actually go to read some of the material that we've posted and then to read all the various posts by individuals who wanted to share with you and with us some of the things they're thankful for. So you can go to our website, pointofview.net, and find some of those resources. And last week, we spent some time talking about spiritual warfare. And if you did not have an opportunity to get a copy of our free ebook on spiritual warfare, there's a button there as well so that you can get Spiritual Warfare, the Battle to Restore Christ in Our Culture. So we're making available the Thanksgiving quiz, spiritual warfare ebook, and of course all of the Owlegories material that we talked about this hour as well. Hope you appreciated the program, and I certainly appreciate the work done behind the scenes by Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila. Have a great day, and we will see you back here tomorrow on our Wednesday just before Thanksgiving. See you then.
I hope you received Kerby's email sent out on Sunday. We've been talking about spiritual warfare lately because of Kerby's new ebook. And the crowning weapon in Ephesians chapter 6 is prayer. As you know, prayer is more than simply asking for things. It's also giving thanks for all God has done and promised to do. One of my favorite Old Testament passages is 2 Chronicles 20, where God's people won a war by putting the choir out front to praise and give thanks to God. They showed where their trust was based by what they did. And we want you to join us in a similar effort this week. Right now, our Week of Thanks. Visit pointofview.net. There's a banner in the middle of the page, Week of Thanks. Click on that and encourage others by sharing the reasons you're thankful. I know some won't make this little effort. Make sure that you lead the charge. Pointofview.net. click the banner for Week of Thanks or visit our Facebook page and give God the glory He is due for what He has done. PointofView.net, Week of Thanks. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.